Good afternoon, good evening, and good morning, everybody, from wherever you're joining us for today's webinar. Welcome to our webinar. In today's webinar, we will talk about publishing opportunities in the Journal of International Business Studies. As you all know, JIB's editorial team has just changed, and we wanted to hear from 4 of the new members as the 2023-25 term begins. This is the 7th webinar we have organized in this series with the Centers of International Business Education at Michigan State and Texas A&M universities as part of our Research Spotlight series. First, I would like to thank you and our esteemed panelists for agreeing to join us for today's webinar. For this webinar, we invited 4 distinguished scholars who are part of the new editorial team in JIBS. They graciously agreed to discuss key trends, topics, and issues in IB research, as well as the best practices for publishing in the leading international business journal, This webinar will include short presentations, 10-minute presentations, followed by a discussion that I will moderate. I will serve as the moderator for this event, and my name is Ahmet, and I'm an associate professor of international business and marketing at Michigan State University, Broad College. I also serve as the director of International Business Center, MSU CIBER, here at Michigan State University. Today, our first panelist is Anthea Zhang from Rice University. She's professor and Fayez Sarofim Vanguard Chair of Strategic Management in the Strategy and Environment Group of Jesse H. Jones Graduate School of Business at Rice University. She currently serves as the president-elect of the Strategic Management Society, associate editor of the Strategic Management Journal, and JIB's area editor for foreign direct investment and technological entrepreneurship in emerging markets, global strategies, and corporate governance area. Our second panelist will be Bill Megginson from the University of Oklahoma. Bill is professor and price chair in finance, and George Lynn in Michael Price College of Business at the University of Oklahoma. He is currently serving as one of the 2 finance area editors in the Journal of International Business Studies. Our third panelist is Mingyi from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. Mingyi is the head of the Department of Accounting and Fung Term Professor of Accounting in the School of Business and Management. Her editorial area in the JIBS include international accounting and sustainability disclosures, global finance intermediaries, transparency in international business. Although David Griffith is usually one of the co-hosts for the Research Spotlight events, today I convinced him to serve as one of our panelists because he's one of the area editors in global marketing in the Journal of International Business Studies. David is the Halle Vanderheider Chair in Business, Professor of Marketing, and Associate Director of Research in the Center for International Business Education and Research at Texas A&M University. Today, we will start our panel with Anthea Zhang from Rice University. You can send your questions directly to me. You can send your questions via the Q&A function, and I will monitor those questions closely and group them and pose the questions to the panelists. Without further ado, I will hand the proverbial microphone to Anthea, and we will start our discussion.
Well, thank you so much, Ahmet and David, for putting together the panel together. It's truly my honor to be on this panel and share my view about publishing opportunities in JIBS. So just a little bit about my professional background. I got my PhD degree in business administration in the University of Southern California. And I have been at Rice University as a faculty member since 2001. It's a long time. It's unbelievable, I know. So in terms of publications, I have published in NJ, SMJ, JIBS, as well as a couple of marketing journals, including Journal of Marketing and Journal of Marketing Research. So I have to say, I really enjoy being an editor. As you can see from my experience as an editor, I started my editor experience at the ANJ as an associate editor. In the most recent 6 years, I have been associate editor for SMJ. Now we just started our term as new team for GIBS. I really look forward to work with our editor-in-chief, Professor Rosella Zhang, as well as my fellow area editors. So my main area for editorial responsibility in GIBS, including foreign direct investment, technological entrepreneurship, in emerging market, global strategy, and corporate governance. So this chart actually was distributed by our GIBS managing editor. It really came very handy for our presentation. It shows that, of course, GIBS welcomes submissions for all disciplines in the business school domain. But as you can show that, in the past 5 years, actually a significant, really significant proportion, we're talking about 25% of all articles published in GIBS are actually in the strategy domain. So strategy is really important part for international business and for GIBS. As a result, as you can see that we have many strategy area editors in GIBS. I highlighted them here. We have 9, strategy area editors. I also highlight where they are based. We have like area editors in United States, in Asia, and also in Europe. So it's very diverse, not only in terms of geography areas, but also in terms of research interests. So we are tasked with a big question. What are the general trends for publishing in the IB area in general or in GIBS in specific? What kind of tips we as a new team may offer to our colleagues? So I was thinking about the question, what are the trends? I may speak from my personal experience. I may speak from my personal research interest perspective, but that certainly will be very narrow, only reflecting my personal preference. So I decided, let me look at the area scope descriptions of the new team. They are selected to be the area editors for good reasons, right? So then, what kind of research areas are they covering now? How do they frame, how do they describe their research interests? So I found that the results of such an exercise are very interesting. I really think that this list, as indicated by those area editors' background and scope description, truly reflected what my understanding of the trend in the IB domain. For example, like global sustainability, especially in terms of multinational companies, social responsibilities, and corporate philanthropies. Think about ExxonMobil's most recent annual profit is $19 billion. 19 billion. That's a lot of money. It's very natural. The countries, government, general public across the globe expect oil company to do something, right? And also, as we've seen, the geopolitics, in many parts of the world will definitely have impact on multinational companies' operations and strategy, as well as, the social movement, social activism toward multinational companies. And more importantly, how multinational companies are responding to the new wave of geopolitics and social movements. And as we see the challenges of globalization, we are talking about deglobalization, regionalization. China, actually now we're talking about dual circulation, creating one circle for the domestic market, another one for international market, right? And of course, corporate governance is an important topic. To my research interest, like I'm truly interested in, emerging market firms, international expansion. I'm very interested compared to traditional multinational companies, how those new giants, their motivations, their location choices, their behaviors might be different from traditional multinational companies. and the government play a more active role in attracting or preventing, foreign direct investments, depends on their motivations. And also we see new waves of international expansion backed by home country governments. And of course, many digital firms like Airbnb, like Uber, those kind of new generation of companies, they globalization through like a digital globalization. What is that? How is that different from traditional multinational oil, like multinational companies in manufacturing industries, in oil and gas industry? So all these are very interesting topics. In my view, they represent at least part of the trends that for IB research. Then talk about tips. Again, I really speak from my personal experience. My research has been largely driven by phenomena. I'm very interested about what is happening right in the world. I start from phenomena. And as we talked about, a lot of interesting things, a lot of important things are happening. Just give you a couple examples, right? Oil major companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, BP, all decided to pull out from Russia because of Russia-Ukraine conflict. And that does not come easy. Shell just announced that, they are going to write off up to $5 billion in assets after Russian exit. What does it mean, right? What does it mean to other multinational companies who may be still in Russia, or they eventually pull out, but they have been slowing in announcing their exit? How the public, how investors reacted to their decision. Another example, right? Because the Xinjiang cotton, many multinational companies, including Adidas, including Nike, including H&M, announced that they are not going to use cotton made in Xinjiang, right? But that those companies faced big pushback, broadcast in China. So as announced that actually Adidas replaced China cheap as a sales support. So a lot of interesting and important phenomena are happening. We can get ideas from those phenomena. And also I'm an empirical researcher. I always care about where are data, what kind of data I can have access. I'm very fortunate. I work with good scholars, hardworking scholars. Together, we have access to some very interesting data. For example, we look at multinational companies from China, their location in the past 12 years, right? Without such data, we would not be able to explore the research questions and we are interested in. But last but not least, it's really theory, right? We need, it's not a random thinking, it's not just data driven. It's really, we need to go back to theory, see that how the current theories can inform us to explain the phenomenon that we observe, how the new phenomenon, how the unique data allow us not only explain the phenomenon, but also contribute back to the theory development and the literature development. Again, I stop here and I really look forward to hearing my fellow panelists' comments. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So our next panelist is going to be Bill.
Okay. Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. It's my first. Actually, I've never done anything at all with AIB or JIBs until 2019, and it seems like it's been kind of the very center of my career ever since. So it's a learning curve. So I guess unlike most folks, I'm quite new to this, but I'm one of the two finance area editors. Fortunately, Limison, but the other area editor has been doing this for a long time, and so he's helped me get started with it. But just a little bit of background: I professor, Price Chair of Finance, University of Oklahoma. I'm also visiting professor at UIBE in Beijing, working short-term consultant for the World Bank. Until 2019, I was the Saudi Aramco Chair Professor at King Fahd University, Petroleum Minerals in Dhahran. So, I mean, I travel a lot. I think I've been to 85 countries and lived in 5. So international has just always been part of my personal experience and career. Lemma is very much the same. He's originally from Ethiopia. He's been an American citizen now for many, many years. He's the chair professor at the University of Maryland. He's also worked extensively and recently in African development and is back now pretty much full-time in academia. Both of us have published fairly well. When you look at what we handle, it looks like there's a lot of overlap, and there is, but basically between us, we cover quite a few areas of finance. So we should be able to handle, if we don't know personally, we know who to go to handle most any area. I guess if we got just a straight international investments paper, neither one of us would try to do it ourselves, but we would be able to find people to do it. So again, it's good to have an experienced hand with us. So international finance, I actually, in preparing this, I had received wisdom that relatively few papers in finance publish in GIBs. Turns out that's not quite true. I over the last couple of days, I've looked the last 3 years and actually went through and as I'll mention on the next slide, found 270 articles, and 35 of those were on financial topics. So all areas of corporate finance, especially investments, markets and institutions, venture capital, private equity. My key area of research for the last 30 years has been the privatization of state-owned enterprises, state-owned investors, sovereign wealth funds, and generally the government's role in business. But I teach venture capital and private equity. So we've, between us, published and syndicated loans. So we cover a good bit of territory. One of the pitches, actually, we just had our major finance conference in October in Atlanta, the Financial Management Association, and we had a GIBS reception. So we basically introducing ourselves to the more general finance profession. We actually had 85 people show up, so we were very pleased with this. And the pitch we're making to increase the order flow for finance is basically the most important thing, of course, is this massive impact factor that GIBS has, 11.1, 11.3, depending on how you measure it. This is twice the Journal of Finance. This is a huge impact factor. So as most of us know, certainly on this panel, but also many in the audience, as you become more senior in the field, and you've been doing this as long as I have now, coming up on 40 years, you become more interested in the number of citations than actually the number of publications in your field. So this is the pitch that we're making to really senior professors. And as I'll show in a couple of slides, quite a few of them have published in recent years. Ross Levin has over 100,000 Google Scholar sites. This is one of the gods of finance. So Florencio Lopez de Salinas has the same thing. So we've had several people who have recently published, and that's who we're trying to reach out to, as well as junior people. One of the things that for the finance folks in the audience, finance and economics folks, that it's really struck me reading GIBS is that theory to financial economists, it basically means equations, right? It's going to be starting with highly mathematical and in many ways quite rigorous. In GIBS, in international business, theorizing is more textual. It's basically conceptual and development. I'm more familiar with the financial economics. Actually, I have to say, I prefer the theory. I was trained originally as a scientist, I have a bachelor's degree in chemistry. So this is really more like the scientific method that I was originally introduced to. But just keep in mind, if you're a finance person looking to send something to GIBS, read a few articles in GIBS first. And so you understand what theorizing means in an international business journal. I guess a couple of things with shorthand version we tell the people at this reception and more generally is that a couple of things that must be met for a GIBS paper. Well, it's got to be multinational, right? It can't be a single country study, almost. And looking back over the last 35 papers, there were one or two that were just China, but basically it has to be multinational and not purely single country. Preferably comparative financial practices type studies, single country, pure macroeconomic studies really are discouraged. They don't have much of a shot here. And again, it's a top journal, so it has an acceptance rate that's in the mid single digits. It's very low, similar to Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial Economics. And then another thing that really came to mind as I got into Jibs is to see that it has a focus, as kind of the name implies, on multinational companies. Hugely important, but in the straight general finance area, this is not something that we normally think about. But this is, if you're thinking about sending papers in, that's what you want to keep in mind. Okay, so going back to 2020, January 2020 on till the most recent one now, there's 9 publications a year in Jibs. So we've had 8 for 2022. 270 papers have been published. 35 of those I identified as finance, and kind of the touchstone I used to make that was until 2020 for 3 years. I had a term as the editor of the Journal of Corporate Finance. And my touchstone was, would this paper have actually been sent into review, or would it have been just rejected as not fitting the corporate finance? And only one of those would not have made the screen, and only because it was a straight investments paper. So there's really quite a bit more of finance than I was thinking. So 1 in 8 papers, basically, 13% of the papers over the last 3 years have been in finance. Ownership structure, as in the finance academic literature, is by far the most important, the most widely cited, the most widely published area of topical area published in Jibs. It is in finance as well. A lot of studies also within this look at corporate social responsibility, as in academic finance. ESG, less so in Jibs, but in academic finance, ESG topics are very important. Foreign direct investment, I saw Anthea had this listed as in another area, but this is also mainstream corporate finance, mainstream international finance is going to be foreign direct investment, divestment, both inbound and outbound, determinants, effects of this. The 6 papers there, 4 papers on banking, internal capital markets versus external capital markets, venture capital, security issuance, syndicated loans. I mean, these are again core finance topics, financial intermediation and capital markets topics, international banking and financial intermediation. My area of research, principal area of research, state versus private ownership, sovereign wealth fund investment, SWF. Another very important recent area in academic finance and economics is political connections, the importance of political connections, the importance of elections, and how that impacts investment, capital investment, capital flows in and out, the law and finance literature. All of this is very, very good mainstream finance. Mergers and acquisitions, again, that's how my dissertation was, corporate control, as we called it there. And it's showing up in, as you would kind of expect, in cross-border mergers in Jibs. Other finance topic, corporate and international. I was even a capital structure study, which I didn't see a dividend study, but there was certainly at least one capital structure study. So basically, it's open for almost any area of finance that is international, particularly multinational, particularly comparative corporate finance. There was actually a couple that were methodological papers, at least in part. So what I'm going to do now, I'm going to give you 8 examples of recent papers published with some of the gods of finance, top tier people. Ross Levin is again 100,000 plus citations. Chen Lin has published more than probably any active financial economist in Greater China, has done superbly well there. This is the only one time I'll mention myself here. But it's really with April Neal and Omran Gudani and Lima Sinbet, my other area editor. This one was wasn't my idea, but I'm proud to be an author of this. Basically, what we show in this one is that the impact of COVID on the stock returns and the stock valuation of multinational versus purely domestic companies. And kind of as you'd expect, but importantly, the first year of the pandemic, multinationals were hurt far worse in terms of their stock price performance than purely domestic companies. So writ large, does this mean that globalization is in retreat, or is it still advancing? And of course, the answer is yes. In some areas, it is clearly in retreat. Other areas, it's such a powerful force that it will continue. But clearly, more onshoring, more secure supply lines, moving out of China, other areas. All this is going on, but also in many ways, globalization is also continuing. State ownership and state, I was actually a referee of this before I was affiliated with Jibs at all. State ownership and state credit, trade credit, basically state-owned enterprises provide a lot of trade credit to smaller companies. So this is one of the externalities that sovereign wealth, that state-owned enterprises provide, although they're generally much less efficient than private companies. This one was kind of surprised me. This one was on real options analysis, which is kind of heavy duty mathematical finance, not the way that it's written here. They write it much more in an accessible format. But Linus Georgios is one of the mainstream real option authors in finance, multinational portfolio diversification, and many multinational enterprise performance. This was some of the real I'm sorry, I'm an expert witness on a trial, and the verdict was just my wife just showed me the verdict, and our team won, so it's good. Business group and Cosine Synthesis, Randall Mark, Bernard Young. Bernard Young is the dean of the NUS, National University of Singapore Business School. Randall Mark also has 80,000 Google Scholar sites, so these are heavy hitters in finance. Amar Gandhi, Coach John, these are Texas Institutions Innovation. Innovation is one of the most important areas in the finance literature. What is it better to be private versus public company? How can you support innovation? What are the things? Again, this is an application to multinational institutions and multinational companies. Venture capital. Again, I teach a course in venture capital, private equity. I love it. You had 2/3 of $1 trillion in venture capital invested last year, 630 billion, twice the previous record. So there's a wall of private capital, particularly venture capital and private equity. And these guys look at that. And then last one, tranching in the syndicated. I was also a referee for this paper. Syndicated loan market. Syndicated loans are $5 trillion a year, the largest single corporate financing market of all. And that shows up here in Jibs. So I appreciate the opportunity to show this. And by the way, if anybody wants the summary I put together about what's been published in Jibs, please send me an email. I'll be happy to share it with you. But this is the contact for Lima and myself. Thank you.
Bill, thank you very much. This was a great overview of what's going on the finance side. And our next panelist is Mingyi from Hong Kong University of Science and Technology. And before we move on, I just wanted to remind our participants to use Q&A to ask questions, or just send your questions directly to me in the chat, and I'll put those questions together and ask to our panelists at the end of their presentations. Mingyi?
Good. I think. Could you hear me? Okay. It's my pleasure to be here. This is a brief background information about my background. I received my PhD from MIT. I'm a former editor of the Accounting Review. I have published, of course, at Jibs, and also accounting journals, as well as finance journals. So this is an indication that accounting and finance research is often closely related. That's probably like in Anthea, that's chart, accounting and finance is grouped as an area. And my editorial areas include international accounting and sustainability disclosure, transparency and international business studies, and global financial intermediaries. That is to say, I welcome all studies related to corporate reporting and disclosures in global market, and the reporting practice of multinationals. And these subjects could include the traditional old auditing, financial reporting, managerial accounting, taxation, as well as the increasingly popular sustainability disclosures. The tips for success, and this is my view so far, based on my experience, is a successful submission needs to be embedded in international business in terms of theory and empirics. For empirics, I think for accounting scholars and finance scholars, this is kind of common suspect. For JIBs, typically involve cross-country samples, multinational firms, or cross-border activities. It helps to have interesting and important phenomenon and also good identification to establish the causal inferences. But what's the biggest challenge? I think Bill hinted a little bit about the theory for JIBs is kind of different. One for accounting, economics, or finance scholars have in mind is the way it's presented or developed. So for submission to JIBs, often think the biggest challenge I find is to advance the IB research frontier. That is to contribute to the new conceptual development, how to articulate how the study move or break new ground and to the relevant line of literature. So this is the biggest challenge as far as I can see. Now, in terms of the trends, I have two trends I would like to share. The first one is the growing popularity of event-based studies. This is sort of a summary of the number of international accounting articles in top accounting journals, top 5 accounting journals, including I also include JIBs here. As you can see, in the past 2 decades, as you can see, the number of event-based studies starts to surpass the number of comparative studies from year 2010. The common events, the most common event is the adoption of the worldwide adoption of International Financial Reporting Standards, or IFRS, which happened in 2005. But other common events include the mandatory quarterly reporting, financial crisis, and now COVID that Bill was talking about, and also anti-dumping investigation, equity market liberalization, cross-listing. And the nice thing about international studying is there are many regulatory shocks, just like the decoupling, the global events. So those all present a wonderful setting to look at, for us research to ask new questions and push the frontier. Another trend I want to share is the widespread adoption of sustainability reporting standards. This I echo the thing that why this is so important. This is a report from Carrots and Sticks by KPMG and United Nations. As you can see, the number of mandatory sustainability reporting instruments increases from 35 in 2006 to over 248 in 2016. I could see in our lifetime, or actually in next couple of years, the global convergence of sustainability or ESG, CSR reporting standards is on the way. So with that, I hope you find the information useful, and I look forward to your submission related to international accounting. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Great presentation. And I really appreciate everybody's efforts to stay within the 10 minutes so that we can have questions. And I have some questions myself. And since I've found such a great panel here, I'm not really going to, I'm going to use this opportunity to ask some questions. And hopefully our participants are going to ask more questions as well. And yeah, so our next presenter is David Griffith, and my co-host, but this time he's a panelist, and he's going to talk about the global marketing area.
Thank you, Ahmet. Hopefully everyone can see my slides. Yes, we're good. Awesome. Thank you so much. My name is David Griffith. I am the incoming or current global marketing area editor for JIBS. I'm also an associate editor for the Journal of Marketing currently. Many of you may know me from my prior role as editor-in-chief of the Journal of International Marketing. I did that for 6 years. I am so massively thankful for Kostas Katsikias and Said Sami, who were the prior international marketing area editors. We do have 2. They've both done a phenomenal job in broadening our discipline and trying to advance papers through. Said is continuing on as an AE, and I am going to be stepping into the role that Kostas was holding. What's important to understand about our area is that obviously we overlap. Both Kostas and Said, and then myself and Said, have very broad publication records. And so as papers come in, Rosalie tries to balance across the 2 so that we have sort of equal workloads. However, we do both have our own specializations. And so when you're submitting, you can always direct it to one or the other of us. And then Rosalie usually communicates with us as to whether or not we want to take on that manuscript or if we have the workload for it, et cetera. So Said and I will be working as a team to hopefully advance the area of international marketing. I saw a number of my IM colleagues on the participant list. Many of you are aware that the AIB had an international marketing task force over the last few years. And one of those aspects is to increase representation of the field of international marketing within AIB, but also within the Journal of International Business Studies. So I'm hopeful we can do that. In terms of publishing tips and trends, I'm sort of going to stay a little bit broadly. First thing I will say is that in the area of international marketing, JIBS really wants to publish cutting edge research that breaks new ground and whose fundamental contribution is to the international marketing discipline. As manuscripts come into JIBS, they are reviewed by an area editor and then oftentimes forwarded to an editor so that we can actually sort of look to see what the contribution to the international area is. We get a lot of papers that may be more mainstream and have a smaller international element. I would direct you to the editorial that was done a few years ago by Rosalie and Arjun on what makes a study sufficiently international. And just so I can say I feel your pain, it was only in 2011 that I had my most recent desk reject from JIBS, and I was told my paper was not international enough. So really JIBS is looking for those truly international marketing papers as opposed to mainstream marketing papers. And that really gets into the second point, which is that it extends international marketing theory as opposed to sort of looking at a marketing phenomenon simply across other markets or simply applying something in one market then to another. So that where that fundamental contribution is really to the IM area is what JIBS is looking for. I think another element, JIBS, to Bill's point, JIBS has a huge impact factor, and that is because JIBS is very focused on making sure that we're studying real world problems. So I would say that, addressing important real world global marketing phenomena or problems. I've been on the ERB for a decade at JIBS, and I would say that sometimes we get data sets that are being looked at that are very, very unique. And as such, it's difficult to see the applicability to a larger group of firms, and that can become an issue. In terms of broadly on the methodological side, once again, I'm going to refer you to the literature on a lot of this. JIBS is an A-level journal. There's no question about it. And when I say A, I mean A+. In the marketing area, we place ourselves among JM, JMR Marketing Science Management, Science Journal of Consumer Research, Journal of Consumer Psychology. As such, when sort of moving into and trying to publish within JIBS, the first thing I'd say is make sure you're well aware of the international marketing literature and how it's dealing with different topics. There's, when we start thinking about international, oftentimes culture comes up. So I direct you to to work such as the Lenartowitz and Roth paper, which talks about when it's appropriate to use indirect value for national culture versus direct value. We also have had great work on issues of endogeneity in international business research that we should be aware of when submitting to the journal. And also the Frankie and Ritchie paper, which really talks about the number of countries that are really needed within a study so that you can actually make generalizable comparisons on cross-cultural issues. So there's a whole international business literature on methodology that's important to incorporate, to be well aware of. But then there's also the international marketing literature. This work, which really looks at sort of how we're going to make choices with using culture and what those consequences are and some best practices. We also had a recent work in the Journal of International Marketing by Hans and Bert that really looked at dealing with common method variants in IM research, which is a really important thing. And then not only do you have the IB literature and the IM literature to be aware of, but also really taking the contemporary view of what's going on in the marketing literature. So a lot of studies will use scales. This is a forthcoming paper in the Journal of Consumer Psychology that looks at scale use and abuse, because obviously capturing the right constructs. And then there was a really nice set of commentaries, and Kostas actually has a piece in there that sort of talks about the international side of scale utilization. So I think really making sure that we are up to date on the most current aspects of the literature is really necessary for publishing in JIBs. In terms of the topics, I did not want to provide a direct hot topics kind of thing. What I want to do is say, look, in the field of international marketing, we've had a tremendous number of scientometric studies over the last decade, which really help understand our discipline. So for example, you go back to the JAMS paper by Sami and Chabowski, which really look at knowledge structures in the IM discipline. Leonidas has a wonderful paper on sort of state of art review on what the literature looks like. Naveen Danthu has done two different recent bibliometric studies that look at about a decade worth of research on the broad area of IM published in first in IMR. And then he did one on the Journal of International Marketing. So we can see the different clusters like branding and internationalization and cross-cultural marketing and relationship marketing, and sort of see some of the major areas. And then most recently, Sami has an editorial that really looks at the overarching role of international marketing relevance and centrality, as well as laying out a large number of future directions. My point here is that JIBS is a broad-based marketing journal, international marketing journal. And so we're looking for current topics as well as established topics. And obviously, as you move into the more established topics, it can sometimes be a little more challenging to make a substantive contribution because there's been a lot done, but there is still a lot of opportunity in those developed areas to make really important contributions as those areas developed. I'll take, for example, country of origin. Tremendous work that's been done in country of origin, but with issues of brand acquisitions, issues with multiple global sourcing, all of these topics take on new flavors. And therefore, I think there's tremendous opportunity to do work in those. In terms of the IM area contribution areas from a methodological side to think about and sort of publishing in the journal, I think that we're seeing more, much like in marketing, we're seeing more and more use of multiple methods to investigate phenomena, to really triangulate on some of the phenomena so that you can, every method has its limitations. And I think that from that standpoint, recognizing that and saying, okay, secondary data is nice, but secondary data is not the only way to do things, and it has its own limitations. And so maybe complement it with the survey research or complement it with experiments. Longitudinal data sets, really important to understanding phenomena, doing both survey longitudinal, which are hard, but clearly address the issue of cross-sectional problems, as well as secondary longitudinal data sets. I think well-designed cross-sectional surveys, issues that when the survey is designed to account for endogeneity and causality, are publishable. They're important, but we have to do them rigorously. In terms of experiments, over the years, we've had a number of papers that have been sort of single or, 2 experiments in a lab, or now we've moved to a lot of online experiment versions. If you look at state of the art in the marketing literature, we're really asking for multiple experiments as well as complemented by a field study so that we can actually see that. So my point is that the standards for the marketing discipline are applied within the international marketing discipline as well, as given that JIB's acceptance rate is around 6 to 7%, as Bill was talking about. And so making sure that we're really trying to maintain the highest standards, really important. And then I think when we look at national culture, and I had mentioned this before, and this is not a new issue, it's direct value assessment versus indirect value assessment. I published a paper a decade ago with Gaia Rubera, and we went in with with indirect value assessment for national culture. And the reviews came back and said, no, you need to redo all the work and you need to do direct value for national culture. You need to measure those because that's really what was required at the time. And I think we need to understand when it's required and when it's not. So my closing comments are simply going to be, the international marketing area wishes to publish more papers in international marketing in JIBs. We are open to a wide spectrum of topics and a wide spectrum of methods, and we're looking for the most rigorous research possible. And with that, I say thank you, and I look forward to your submissions in the Journal of International Business Studies. And I will
Thank you.
stop
Thank you,
sharing.
David. And thanks to all the others who have provided their insights. And I think our webinar has already accomplished its purpose in terms of getting guidance about research directions, hot topics, and how to publish in JIBs. I have received a couple of questions through the chat function, and then we have some others in the Q&A. And I'd like to start with some broader questions. The first one is about your vision. So as I mentioned at the beginning of the webinar, one of the reasons we wanted to have organized this panel is to hear from 4 of the new members of the 23-25 term. And as a new member of the JIBs editorial team, what is the vision for the specific areas that you represent? And where is JIBs now? And where should it be in 3 or 4 years down the road? And if maybe we can start with Mingyi in the reverse order and then continue with David, Anthea, and Bill. That would, I'm sure our panelists, our participants are going to appreciate and would like to hear your opinions on those issues.
Sure. Just one quick observation. One thing I want to at least start to push in first couple months of first year is to increase the number of submission and awareness among accounting scholars to establish JIBs a top accounting area of interest. Because I think most people, like as I showed the chart, top accounting journal, accounting review, journal accounting economics, journal accounting research, they all publish international studies. And we have our own way of writing theory, writing papers, which is quite distinct from JIBs. So we will try to bring more those high quality submission into JIBs in terms of the area. So in a sense, it will help the accounting researcher to better understand the international business theories and the relevant field. And I hope there would be some synergy, because right now it's kind of different group of accounting researchers doing studies in JIBs of versus publishing top 3 accounting. I think there's a real synergy that's going on because they are new, as I said, that they are sustainability accounting disclosure standards, there are new standards coming out. and they should require new thinking, not just traditional or comparative economics or some kind of new institution cultural factor. We cannot just use those kind of institutional factor for financial reporting and run the regression on sustainability disclosure. It doesn't work that way. You have to think from ground up. So this requires bring new thinking. So my idea is that there are more events, the world is changing. We need to think in a new way, so that you require broaden audience, broaden the submission and participant to really think about how to push this frontier and to address new questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. David?
I think my vision for JIBs in the IM area is to increase international marketing representation in JIBs. I would like to be able to take an advocate role for manuscripts that come in as best we can. I mean, the standards are high. If the rigor is there and the topic is really interesting and important, we need to be advancing those papers through. I think all of us have, as AEs, and Alan's here too, so you can talk about it as from a reviewing editor standpoint. The vast majority of reviewer recommendations is reject. And so I think it's incumbent upon Said and I to be looking at that and really not paying as much attention to that, but really looking at the contribution within the paper and seeing what we can't advance, because JIBs has taken a very constructive review process. And so my hope is that we're getting some, we're making people understand that what was published 5-10 years ago, standards have increased, right? The quality, the rigor has increased. And if we're able to meet those standards and address important topics, that we're going to be able to advance more. I think JIBs has a reputation in some on the IM side of not being open to certain methodologies, et cetera. And I want to say that's not the case. I think we are a very broad and open journal and open to topics and methods, but we expect rigor in those methods.
Thank you, David. Anthea?
Thank you. Well, that's a really good question. I think my mission would be further integrate strategy research with the IB context. I have to admit that in terms of both publishing experience and editing experience, I definitely have more experience in MJ, SNJ space than in JIB space. That's why I need to be very careful about my potential buyers and to have a better understanding, to learn, the IB community. From my point of view is that, I kind of go very like the point Mingyi pointed out, if I see a paper, simply only use data, for example, World Bank survey of country-specific analysis about, minority investor protection, institutional environment, nice. But, they can't explain a lot of things, right? For example, a recent submission I handled is about export, right? I think it is important. But meanwhile, if you only look at the I understand scholars are constrained by the data you have access. But just looking at the export data, I don't know how to interpret the findings. From a strategy scholar perspective, I would think that, firm-specific attributes, country-specific attributes would be important to understand why firms do what and where. So my mission would be further integrate strategy research with the IB context and further kind of strengthen the theoretical contribution. We are not just point to point, explaining one thing at one time. It's really we start from one point, one phenomenon, then think about what is a general implication. Without jumping to the general implication, then the contribution of any paper would be quite limited. And of course, the overall trend across all journals in management area is that, empirical rigor. I know it's really hard to get all 3 points and, practical relevance and, theoretical novelty and empirical rigor. It's hard to achieve 3, but that is my goal. Let's see how much we can do.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you very much. Great answer. And I think it's very insightful. Bill?
Yes, a very interesting question, actually, and we've thought about it and talked about it. I guess to summarize it, that my quick answer would be to try to make for JIBS as important a finance journal as management science has become. Which, to those of you not in the field, that may sound strange, but management science was a separate discipline and it had its own journal, top journal in its field. And 20 years ago, no finance professor would have even thought about that. Now, because of both, for a number of reasons, the collapse of the Journal of Business and other things, it has now become the fourth finance journal. Excellent, A plus journal in finance, widely cited. Places where people send their best work. JIBS is an A journal. It's an A journal at the University of Oklahoma, but it just became that because really it was not something that many folks in finance had looked at before. So essentially, make it so that this is a perceived as a top finance journal, widely cited in the Journal of Finance, Journal of Financial Economics. And over time, I think it can be done, but it's basically it's not a hostility; it's just a lack of knowledge among finance folks about this. So that would be the top one. More generally, it's just a little bit of background. When I started the PhD program in August 1982, the Dow Jones Industrial Average was 775. At its peak earlier this year, it was 36,000. So in the space of less than one complete career, it has gone up 45 times. It's over $100 trillion and $120 trillion in market cap from $3 trillion in 1983. What's the point? The point is that capital markets have become absolutely immense. And within that, all over the world, you've had this major shift from state ownership to private ownership globally. But it also, what's going on now is you've had an absolute collapse in initial public offerings in the United States. So how do companies access public capital markets? Well, quick answer is they don't. They access private capital markets, and private equity now is well over $6 trillion in total assets under management. And the world is basically, that's just how corporations finance their operations. So to make the international aspect of finance more relevant to academic finance and practitioners in finance would be my primary objective as a area editor.
Thank you. Thank you very much for these insights. So I would just like to shift the gear a little bit. There are my mental factor analysis give me two sets of questions here. One of them is about the process. So there are some questions about the process by which the papers are handled in JIBS, and we have information about those issues on the website, but there are a couple of questions about who chooses the reviewer, and are the AEs aware of who the authors are, and is authorship blind to AEs, things like that, and also the role. And one important question that I'm also very curious about to hear your opinions on is about the role of the AEs and how high the desk rejects are, and how most of that is carried out by the reviewing editors. So if you could just provide some insights into that, I'm sure most of our participants are going to appreciate that.
Perhaps let me start, because I'm probably the newest one to be affiliated with this. So I'm coming in from being the editor of the Journal of Corporate Finance, and it's completely different. Take it piece by piece. JCF, other finance journals, in other business disciplines, it's no longer a blind review at all. The area editors, we always see, even in JIBS, you always see the authors, but the reviewers do not. In JCF and other journals, they see everything, right? They see the title page. I actually think that's better, but that's not the way JIBS does it. So we'll keep it that way. So how do we pick reviewers? I guess each one of us has a different method. I start with the references. I go to the references and pick out basically somebody who's published in either JIBS or a top journal in the last 15 years on this topic, have a list of different ones. and basically try to find top tier people who have published in this area who would be willing to serve. So you pick 3 with 3 backups, and generally we try to do 3 reviews for each paper. The actual reviewing is done initially. We don't see it. The limit and I don't see the first pass. It goes to a reviewer editor. There's 2 reviewer editors at JIBs, and an extremely high reject rate. It's over 65%, I think. But now we've worked out an agreement where if there's any doubt, they quickly show Lemma and I the paper and see, should we go ahead and put this in review? Usually we agreed with the desk reject. Why do we desk reject? It's not international enough. It's not multinational enough. There's no theory. Or it's obvious that this is the 6th journal that you sent it to after exhausting all the finance journals. I mean, this is, just to put it in perspective, I've been doing this for not that long, but for a contributing editor for almost 2 years now. And I've only done 1 revise and resubmit of all the editorial decisions. Everything else has been based on the reviews and my own reading. Have been rejected. So it's a high bar, but the more I see it, the more, even though it's quite different from what I was used to, I'm pretty impressed with the process.
Thank you, Bill, for the detailed information about your approach. Anthea?
Thank you. I think the process of choosing reviewers making decisions are very similar to my experience in MJ, SMJ, like area editors pick up reviewers. So as you know, Bill said, this is 3 as a general rule. When I choose reviewers, typically what I'm looking at, what is a topic? Of course, I want somebody, who is familiar with the topic, who have a credible publishing record, demonstrated expertise to review the piece. The second one is really the context. If it's about China, I would like somebody who is familiar with the Chinese context, right, to review it. If I have, the opportunity, the paper using some unique methods, data, I would like a 3rd reviewer to cover that part. But by the end, as an editor, my philosophy is that, I don't count recommendations of reviewers. It is my decision. It's my judgment consulted by, reviewers. I make my judgment, independent judgment. I make a decision with the help of reviewers' comments. And go back to the chart, the question in the Q&A. Say, JIB does have a very high rejection rate. I think it's a dynamic question, right? On one hand, the reviewers are limited, reviewers' time is very, pressured. We don't want to flood them with so many assignments. And also, I remember as a junior scholar or as a scholar in general, I really think that, editors, better if they don't see a potential of a paper, it's better not to drag the paper down the road. Because if eventually after multiple round revision, the paper is still rejected, is actually more wasteful in terms of time, it's more painful to the author. It's actually better to say, I don't see the potential. Here are the suggestions. Hopefully you can improve your paper based on those suggestions, have a better luck in another journal. But meanwhile, I think, our editor-in-chief and the whole team are trying to do something upfront. We have like different workshops with conferences or standalone workshops to help authors to improve their manuscripts before their submission to JIBs or to other journals. In this way, the chance for the authors to get an opportunity to be sent out for review, get on out, will be higher. And also, meanwhile, we also don't kind of waste reviewers' time. That's my 2 cents.
Thank you. And I just wanted to use the opportunity to thank all the area editors and editors who are really doing a lot of heavy lifting. As someone who has been serving some journals in limited capacity, I can only appreciate, as special issue editor and so on for a couple of journals, I can only appreciate how much work that goes into the reviewership process as well as the other side. And as certainly an author, I do appreciate all the valuable comments that I always get from the area editors. Those are really very critical. So thank you. Mingyi.
Thank you. I echo Bill and Anthea's point, so I just want to quickly highlight two things from the accounting area. The first point is, in terms of the experience I have, it's quite similar with Bill. GIBS system is very different from traditional accounting journal, like accounting review. The desk rejection rate is very high in GIBS, 60%, 70% so far, because before we decide whether to send out a review, the reviewing editor very helpfully and very knowledgeable will help together review whether that fit, quality, and contribution. And so I make quite a bit of desk rejection decision on this stage. This stage take me more time. I usually have to take a page to talk about why in terms of quality of fit a little bit, but I think it's best for the author. I appreciate this system. I think it's very efficient. Now, once for the limited number of papers that I decide to send out a review, the key question, that's my second point, is how do I pick the reviewers? I go for my editorial board members first, because I have known their work. They are expert in different areas. So of course, I read the reference list. I read at least glance through the introduction, because by going through whether to reject the paper, I already know the motivation and contribution. So I select my reviewer based on that. And I tend to go for senior reviewers, the editorial board member. If they're exhausted, they are too many, they already have paper and the review, then I will go for my other pool of colleagues who I think are qualified and to review this line of work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mingyi. David.
So I won't repeat everything that everyone else has said. I would say the GIBS is a little bit unique from the standpoint that we really do serve as editors. However, our decision when we move towards those final steps are also checked by another editor, a higher level, for consistency of quality across the journal. So when we're making those decisions, we're working as part of a team, and I would say that Rosalie has done a great job of really having us as a set of AEs interact and discuss expectations for the journal so that we can all maintain sort of a high level of quality and consistency across all the different areas that we have.
Thank you. Thank you for your answers for this important question. And as I said, my mental factor analysis shows a couple of elements here. And one of them was about the process. And the other one here is about the content and context and specific domains, research domains like international services or social entrepreneurship or social enterprise, emerging markets. Any favorites among these? Any preferences as area editors, or what is your opinions about recommendations for our panelists, for our participants in terms of these types of contextual issues when they're collecting their data and choosing their topics for future research? Let's start with David this time, because he has always been the last one to talk. So
Thank you, Ahmet. No, I think that, from the international marketing side, the question posed on services and hospitality specifically, very open to services. International services is a huge domain, extremely important. Emerging markets, very important. Entrepreneurship from a marketing side, very important. Social entrepreneurship, ESG, all of these are just important topics. I think the cautionary element I would say is, it's substantive contribution on a theoretical side. And I think that there was a time where any data set from China or India would get you an A-level publication. Those days are gone. It's really about what's the fundamental contribution. We don't need another another page, oh, I have Nigerian data, that's going to get me a JIBS, and it's simply not. So I think that we have to be looking at it not necessarily from a contextual aspect, but from a theoretical aspect. And what is the real driver? So what makes an emerging market unique? And I know that I've gotten a couple of papers that have come in, and the reviewing editor has said, how long can we keep calling this country an emerging market? And so there is some concern about simply unique data sets being the driver. And I would just simply say to all authors in all areas to really think about what's the substantive theoretical contribution that's being made within the manuscript to the international literature.
Thank you. Maybe we can go with Bill this time, because he was always one of the last ones, and we're going to conclude with Mingyi and Anthea.
Well, I was actually responding to a note that somebody addressed to me. So I assume, can you repeat the question, please?
Oh, the question is about basically the context. Sometimes international services, or sometimes topics, or social entrepreneurship. Do you have any favorites? Social entrepreneurship or emerging markets, or what is your general opinion about these various contexts that come as part of the package when people submit their work, right?
Well, it's my personal preference, of course, is capital markets. That's always been the part of what I'll say is going to sound very strange, but I was drawn to finance, and particularly to corporate finance, as a creative art. Now, that's going to sound absurd, but basically for me, finance is the creation and funding of entrepreneurial businesses and the expansion thereof. So it's the management of wealth. So it's basically topics that look at how do businesses acquire the money, the capital that they need to expand. How do they use it? How is it provided? What do investors look for? How does capital flow across borders? That's always been a fascinating topic for me. But again, I'm an editor, so it's my personal preferences almost never really come into play until the very, very end at all. So it's going to be one of the things that interesting is that we have in finance. It's called the home equity bias. This is very briefly. This is mostly about stocks, and been popularized for at least 20 years. The idea is that if you look around the world, particularly the U.S., other developed countries, investors hold far more just U.S. stocks than they should. And a well-diversified portfolio should be much higher exposure to international stocks. And it's not. So this is called the home equity bias. Andy Caroli, one of the stars of finance and our long-term editor of Review of Financial Studies, has the home equity bias in academic research. 85% of all the papers that have been published in top finance journals have been U.S. data. So it's just U.S. data. So it's surprisingly hard to break that mold. Of course, all of the capital structure, dividends, security issue, merger and acquisition, venture capital in the early finance literature was just U.S. So what the logical thing many people think of is, well, I'll do the international version of venture capital or security issues or IPOs. That really hasn't flown in finance, in the academic finance literature. I think I would be very, I'd like to see that, actually. And it's one of those things where it would probably not fly in the top tier finance journals, but I think it's important to see this. So comparative corporate finance, I was trained as a scientist, so comparative corporate finance would be something that I would find the most attractive.
Thank you. Thanks. Mingyi?
Thank you. So my personal favorite, my current research agenda is more on disclosure of sustainability issues, right? You can say it's ESG, like social issues, disclosure of or gender diversity, disclosure of supply chain, emission, disclosure. But I think that's my personal preference aside, because we are talking about JIBs. If that's just a single, I do have a mandatory CSR disclosure in China, but that's not an international business study. That's more like a domestic study, that disclosure effect. So for that one thing I will encourage and think about is Well, for example, the impending global convergence of the reporting standard. So how does it work out? Because a lot of countries, the EU, is adopting the non-financial reporting directive, right? How does it work? How does the effect vary across institutions? How does the institutional factors come into play? Or like, how is the disclosure issue? How does the multinational, and then now we have refined subsidiary data. How do the multinational firm deal with those? How does their reporting practice vary across their subsidiaries? And those kind of things, I think, will be interesting for the IB audience. And let's also build on what we have known. There's a lot of studies already, management studies I've learned on performance, these kind of things. Well, for me, I think one kind of productive future area is to look at, that's inherent accounting question, like the effect of disclosure in global market. Thank you.
Thank you. Anthea?
Well, although I hesitate to point out like what are the hot topics, but let's face it, at a certain time, there's some hot topics. Indeed, some of the topics listed in the chat about the social enterprise, they kind of very popular topics in these days. The social, enterprise. I can give you some anecdotal evidence from different angle. We are recruiting this year. Many job candidates, rookies from top schools, their dissertation topics is about the social part of strategy. I think, because after so many years of strategy research about the merger acquisition, innovation, how those strategies can improve like a return, ROA, or stock market return. People get a little tired of, right? For many years, scholars call for, research attention to actually brand challenges. Indeed, we even have a couple like from editors, from MJ, for example, right? Now, the cowboy effect now is reflected in the dissertation topic choices, right? But my question is that while those topics are certainly very important, right, are very popular these days, the fundamental question is how research is done. If just like, for example, if you are interested in social enterprise, but run a lab experiment with recruit undergraduate students, I don't know. Even the topic is interesting. I'm not sure, the research really meets the promise, right? But meanwhile, for example, one job candidate actually went to India, did a field experiment with like about 200 small shopkeepers. I think that carries a great level of credibility about the social enterprises or about the social entrepreneurship in the context of emerging market. So to summarize, my key point is that while the choice of topics certainly is important, some of them are more trendy than others, but fundamentally, it is the quality of the research, how serious, how solid, how well planned the research is.
Great. Thank you. These are really very, very good insights, and I'm sure they're gonna be very useful for our participants when they're submitting their papers to JIBS. So I want to change the focus one more time, and this time I want to move a little bit to the methods area, and it's about qualitative versus quantitative research and phenomenon-based research, and also just wanted to add to that. About a term that I just heard in one of the forthcoming articles in JM, they talk about empirics first versus theory first research, which is very intriguing, actually. And in that context, they talk about phenomenon-based research and the importance of using observations and come up with theory rather than the deduction from theory to the empirics, right? So to theory testing. So what are your thoughts about these issues, qualitative versus quantitative on the method side, and the role of data, feeling the data, understanding the data, and from empirics to theory rather than the other way around that we are used to in JIBS? And Bill? You seem to
Well,
like the question. That's why
I like the question. Yes, I do. And the first thing that came to mind is the old economics saw that the plural of anecdote is data. On the same time, in finance and economics, we have this just almost hostility to survey data. So we're very much quantitative numbers, data. At the same time, you have to have theory. I mean, I was just trained as a scientist. Scientific method is you observe, notice a phenomena, you come up with a hypothesis as to, we're trying to explain objective reality. So what is the hypothesis that would do this? You gather data and test it, and then you either accept or reject the hypothesis. Very quick, I mean, I'll do this very quickly, but my favorite example of this is, why do firms pay dividends? They have for 400 years. It's not clear why they ever should. Why would investors want a cash dividend? This is not the rent money. They're investing in a company, so you would think they'd want it to stay there. So why do firms pay dividends? Well, that's the observation. They do. But who does? Only large publicly traded companies that have been public for a long time, where the ownership structure has gone down and they're mature. Okay, so you hypothesize it has to do with the change in the ownership structure from being very concentrated to being much more atomistic, and you have agency cost. So hypothesis, it's due to agency cost. You form we're blessed in finance with massive data sets. So we have data sets of daily stock returns since 1962, essentially now for every country in publicly traded country in the world. And you basically line all these up, and you look at when a company announces a dividend or an increase in dividends. You line all those up where that's day zero, and you use an event study, our basic methodology in finance, and you see, do investors like dividends? And of course they do. 2 to 3% increase, 85% plus of the time. And so you conclude investors like dividends, probably because it's to overcome the agency cost of dispersed ownership. So it's you really need both. You need theory, if not necessarily a mathematical expression is the way we tend to do it in finance, but you have, actually, I'm not really that much of a fan of it, but that's how we do it. And then you gather data to test that there. You're trying to explain objective reality. So I would, for area or for me personally, it'd have to have some numbers. The larger in, the more impressed I am. But it's got to be both theory and empirics.
All right, great, thank you. Anthea?
Okay. I like this question too. I'm not saying attention, but a comparison between qualitative research versus quantitative research has been around forever and it has been everywhere. First of all, I think the fact that all these journals publish more quantitative research than qualitative research simply because journals receive more submissions of quantitative research than qualitative research. It's like I don't have data to compare like acceptance rate between qualitative or quantitative journal, either AMJ or SMJ, but I do remember when I was an AE of AMJ, we did another analysis, say that once a paper is accepted, published in AMJ, qualitative papers actually on average receive more citations than quantitative research. We just don't get so many submissions from qualitative part. I think one important way, for example, in AMJ, SMJ is that to appoint area editors or associate editors, their main research methods are in the qualitative part. In this way, it not only serves an important signal, so we welcome, we emphasize qualitative research, but also from authors' perspective, they feel more comfortable because their submissions are handled by scholars who are familiar, who appreciate their research methods. I think that is very, very important.
Thank
also,
you.
second part, okay, in terms of like phenomenon-driven, theory-driven, even though my own research is primarily phenomenon-driven, I respect all types of research. I agree with Bill. It's like, no matter where we start, we all try to reach the middle point. Even you start from phenomena, if you stay there, it does not make a big contribution. You still needed to say, how your research in a special context can make more generalizable contribution to a whole literature.
Thank you very much. Mingyi, what are your thoughts about this?
Well, thank you, Ahmet. Well, interesting question. I would say, yes, we welcome both qualitative and quantitative studies, but with a caveat that my specialization is really archival empirical research or capital market research. So if we get qualitative study, well, that's Rosalie's call, but I will be glad to take it, but I will have to consult other editor with that specialize in that methodology, or to kind of line up some reviewer in accounting with the expertise. But I think so far, just my observation in terms of published paper in international accounting area in GIBS, there aren't that many qualitative studies. I'm yet to see why. It could be, it's harder to do that for disclose for do the international survey, right? Because it's very hard to design the good study I know the culture study, there was a survey, it's a famous, but then it's hard to, I think the benchmark, the theory probably is higher. So I haven't seen a lot of submission area. Again, I certainly welcome it. I have my own short limitation, but we'll find a way to overcome it. It's a really interesting study addressing a new question. I don't think that there will be an issue at all in terms of my personal training.
Thank you. David?
I think we're very open to qualitative methodology. We have some experts on our research AE resources that we can use for qualitative. I think that what I've seen over my years in the IB/IM area is that sometimes qualitative papers are actually not following rigorous qualitative methodology, just like sometimes case studies don't. And so oftentimes papers get rejected very early on qualitative because they're not really following triangulation methods, etc. It's, oh, my friend had access to a company, I did 12 interviews, that's a qualitative study. And it's the beginning of a qualitative study, but I think that the methodology has to be much more rigorous. Ahmet, you had mentioned on the second topic, sort of the JM paper. I mean, in marketing, this goes back decades. I mean, this is the empirical generalization versus theoretical foundation. And I'll once again state there's strong tradition and expectations on each path to knowledge discovery. I don't think we are biased for one or the other, but it's maintaining expertise. You submit something that is going to be empirics first. I have reviewers who will be looking for specific aspects on empirics first. And so, you know, it is maintaining rigorous standards, because I think GIBS has, and all of the AEs have at their disposal, excellent reviewers, both on the board and not on the board, that we call upon. I'm going through a paper right now, and I reached out to another discipline for an expert because that paper was touching on that discipline. And I have someone who is extremely well published in multiple disciplines on that topic. So fortunately, GIBS is a strong journal, and we can call on resources from mainstream business journals as well as mainstream journals in sociology, economics, etc., to pull a great review team together to give the paper the most rigorous review, but also the best shot at publication.
Well, thank you all for your comments, suggestions, recommendations, and we unfortunately came to the end of this webinar. I would like to continue for another hour or two, and I'm sure we would sitting here and having great conversations, but we have to conclude our webinar today, our panel today. This was really a great discussion, and thank you for joining us today, for providing your insights and tips on publishing opportunities in GIBS. And I'm sure some of our panelists are going to come and ask you some very specific questions, because we haven't had enough time to answer all of those questions. But don't be surprised if they come and ask you, well, you know, I asked that question during that webinar, but Ahmet Kirca did not let me speak, and I apologize for that. But we had limited time, and we have to say goodbye at some point to our friends and colleagues, right? So I would like to thank our panelists, Anthea, Bill, Mingyi, and David, for joining us and sharing with us their insights and recommendations. And I would like to thank everyone who attended the panel and for asking questions. And before we conclude, I would also like to take a few moments to thank our teams who made this event possible. We wouldn't be talking here and inviting and having this wonderful conversation if it weren't for Kathy Katie Lane and Monica Espinoza from Texas A&M Cyber, and Rhonda Bonnell from my team here at MSU Cyber for their help to make this event possible. And we're looking forward to seeing you again in one of our events in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for organizing the panel. Thank you.
Yep.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ahmet.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Ahmet. Good job.